Hello, my YouTube members. Good evening. How are you all doing? I hope you're all doing well. This is another lecture show uh, of the Enlightenment and higher consciousness. Uh, Tonight's topic is obesity. This is a very controversial subject, an issue about a major health issue that affects a lot of people around the world, including the United States. I wish to talk about this issue because it has affected my life as well. I want to start with what is obesity, what causes obesity, some of the subtopics, the sociological attitudes toward obesity, and finally my opinion about obesity. I'll start to read about it. I'm going to start with reading off Wikipedia.com under obesity. Wikipedia.com is about 70% accurate, as I stated before in previous videos. It's about 70% accurate, so it's acceptable enough. There's approximately 30% of the information is completely invalid, incorrect, or obsolete. I mean, it was once a fact, but now it has been disproven and completely obsolete. But 70% of it is current, factual, or based on truth. And, I'll mention that, and anything that is within that 30% that is incorrect or inaccurate or been obsolete, I just won't mention it. Or I might mention it and just state that it's inaccurate information or invalid, or state that it's been obsolete. What was once a fact and now is obsolete. I'll start off with obesity. What is obesity? Most people know this already, but just for the sake of this video, for the purpose of following the course of this video, I'm going to start off with what is obesity. Obesity is a medical condition in which excess body fat has accumulated to the extent that it may have a negative effect on health. People are generally considered obese when their body mass index, BMI, a measurement obtained by dividing a person's weight by the square of a person's height, despite known allometric inaccuracies, is over 30 kilogram / mass square. The range is 25 to 30 kg / m, which represents in algebra represents, or in formula represents mass square, is defined as overweight. Some East Asian countries use lower values simply because that race or population group tends to be commonly thinner, and so their standards are for what is considered obese is a lot lower. Other races tend to be heavier by size, and so it is much higher. What is considered, it's a lot more relative in other population groups. It tends to be higher. People can weigh more before they become classified as obese. Obesity is correlated with various diseases and conditions, particularly cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, obstructive sleep apnea, certain types of cancer, and osteoarthritis. High BMM is a marker of risk, but not proven to be a direct cause for diseases caused by diet, physical activity, and environmental factors. A reciprocal link has been found between obesity and depression, with obesity increasing the risk of clinical depression, and also depression leading to a higher chance of developing obesity. Each one can affect the other, or each one can cause the other interchangeably. Obesity has individual, socioeconomic, and environmental causes, including diet, physical activity, automation, urbanization, genetic susceptibility, medications, mental disorders, economic policies, endocrine disorders, and exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals. While the majority of obese individuals at any given time are attempting to lose weight and often successful, research shows that maintaining that weight loss over a long term, proves to be rare. The reasons for weight cycling are not fully understood, but many include decreased energy expenditure, combined with increased biological urge to eat during the and after, during and after the caloric restriction, which that might be partially true, but this is where I disagree. There are other factors, and I will explain that later in my video. More studies are needed to determine if weight cycling and yo-yo dieting contribute to inflammation and disease risk in obese individuals. Obesity prevention requires a complex approach, including intervention at community, family, individual levels. Changes to diet and exercise are the main treatments recommended by health professionals. Diet quality can be improved by reducing the consumption of energy-dense foods, such as those high in fat or sugars, and by increasing the intake of dietary fiber. However, large-scale analysis have found an inverse relationship between energy density and energy costs of foods in developed nations. Low-income populations are most likely to live in neighborhoods that are considered food deserts or food swamps, where nutritional groceries are less available. Medications can be used along with a suitable diet to reduce appetite and decrease fat absorption. If diet, exercise, medication are not effective, gastric balloon or surgery may be performed to reduce stomach volume or length of intestines, leading to a feeling full earlier or reduced ability to absorb nutrients from food. And I will later express why these surgeries really don't show promise. They create more problems than solutions, and because it's really more about economics. It's a billion-dollar industry, and it's produced more consequences, but I will explain that later. Obesity is a leading preventable cause of death worldwide, with increasing rates in adults and children. In 2015, 600 million adults and 100 million, 12%, and 100 million children were obese in 195 countries. Obesity is more common in women than in men. Authorities view it as one of the most serious public health problems of the 21st century. Obesity is stigmatized in much of the modern world, particularly in the Western world, and though it is seen as a symbol of wealth and fertility at other times in history, and still in some parts of the world. In 2003, several medical societies, including the American Medical Association and the Medical Heart Association, classified obesity as a disease. I don't want to get into classification, they would jump into that. Causes, we'll go into the causes. The carbohydrate insulin model of obesity posits that consumption of high glycemic load carbohydrates produce hormonal changes that promote calorie deposition in adipose tissue, exacerbate hunger, and lower energy expenditure. A calorie model of obesity posits a combination of excessive food intake and a lack of physical activity as the cause of most cases of obesity. I like to mention that this is more of a myth than science. That is pseudoscience, because it doesn't take into consideration other factors, and I will explain later in my video when I reach my opinion, or the subtopic of my opinion. In contrast, intake and the lack of physical activity is the cause of most cases of obesity. A limited number of cases are primarily due to genetics, medical reasons, or psychiatric illness. In contrast, increasing rates of obesity as a societal level are felt to be due to an easily accessible and palatable diet. I don't agree with that also, and I will explain later as to why. Increased reliance on cars and mechanized manufacturing. A 2006 review identified 10 other possible contributors to the recent increase of obesity: insufficient sleep, endocrine disruptors, environmental pollutants that interfere with lipid metabolism, decreased variability in ambient temperature, in decreased rates of smoking, because smoking suppresses appetite, increased use of medications that can cause weight gain, atypical antipsychotics, proportional increase in ethnic and age groups that tend to be heavier, pregnancy at a later age. The ethnic and age group I don't think has anything to do with obesity. I don't see the correlation because every race and every ethnic group within that race, within each race, every race and every ethnic group within each race is susceptible to obesity. It's more of a physiological issue than correlates with race or ethnicity. Pregnancy at a later age, which may cause susceptibility to obesity in children. That may or may not be true. Epigenetic risk factors passed on generationally. That is definitely a fact, and I will also explain. Natural selection for high BMI and assortative mating leading to increased concentration of obesity risk factors. This would increase the number of obese people by increasing population variance in weight. According to the Endocrine Society, there is a growing evidence suggesting that obesity is a disorder of the energy homeostasis system rather than simply arising from past accumulation of excess weight. There is diet, sedentary lifestyle. Sedentary lifestyle plays a significant role in obesity. Worldwide, there has been a large shift towards less physically demanding work, and currently at least 30% of the world's population gets insufficient exercise. This is primarily due to increasing use of mechanized transportation and a greater prevalence of labor-saving technology at home. In children, there appear to be declines of levels of physical activity due to less walking and physical education. World trends in active leisure time and physical activity are less clear. The World Health Organization indicates that people worldwide are taking up less activity, recreational pursuits, while a study from Finland found an increase and a study from the United States found leisure time physical activity has not changed significantly. 2011 review of physical activity in children found it may not be a significant contributor in both children and adults. There is an association between television viewing time and a risk of obesity. A review found 63 out of 73 studies, 68% showed an increased rate of childhood obesity with increased media exposure, with rates increasing proportionally to time spent watching television. Like many other medical conditions, obesity is a result of an interplay between genetics and environmental factors, and that is very true. Polymorphism is in various genes controlling appetite and metabolism, predisposed to obesity when sufficient food energy is present. As of 2006, more than 41 of these sites on the human genome have been linked to the development of obesity, when a favorable environment is present. This is very true, and I will explain further. People with 2 copies of the FTO gene, fat mass and obesity associated gene, have been found in an average to weigh 3 to 4 kilograms more and have a 1.67-fold greater risk of obesity compared with those without a risk ally. The differences in BMI between people that are due to genetics varies depending on the population examined, from 6% to 85%. Obesity is a major feature in several syndromes, such as Parador-Wills syndrome, Bardet-Betty syndrome, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Cohen syndrome, and Momo syndrome. The term non-syndromic obesity is sometimes used to exclude these conditions. In people with the early onset severe obesity, defined by an onset before 10 years of age, and body mass index over 3 standard deviations above normal, 7% harbor a single point DNA mutation. Studies have focused on inheritance patterns rather than on a specific genes that have found that 80% of the offspring of these two parents, obese parents, were also obese, in contrast to less than 10% of the offspring of two parents were of normal weight. Different people exposed to the same environment have different risks of obesity due to their underlying genetics. The Thrifty gene hypothesis postulates that due to dietary scarcity during human evolution, people are prone to obesity. Their ability to take advantage of rare pounds of abundance by storing energy as fat would be advantageous during times of varying food ability. And individuals with greater adiposity reverses would be most likely to survive famine. This tendency to store fat, however, would be maladaptive in societies with stable food supplies, like in the modern age. This theory has received various criticisms, and other evolutionary-based theories such as the Thrifty gene hypothesis and the Thrifty phenotype hypothesis have also been proposed. Certain physical and mental illnesses and pharmaceutical substances used to treat them can increase the risk of obesity. Medical illnesses that increase obesity risk include several rare genetic syndromes listed above, as well as some congenial or acquired conditions: hypothyroidism, Cushing's syndrome, growth hormone deficiency, and some eating disorders such as binge eating disorder and night eating syndrome. However, obesity is not regulated as a psychiatric disorder and therefore is not listed in the DSM-IV as a psychiatric illness. The risk of overweight and obesity is higher in patients with psychiatric disorders than in persons with psychiatric disorders. Certain medications may cause weight gain or changes in body composition. These include insulin, sulfonylureas, I can't pronounce that right, thiazolidinediones, atypical antipsychotics, antidepressants, steroids, certain anticonvulsants, phenytoin and valproate, fesotifen, and some forms of hormonal contraception. And we'll go on to social determinants. While genetic influences are important to understanding obesity, they cannot explain the current dramatic increase seen within specific countries or globally. Though it is accepted that the energy consumption, excess energy expenditure, leads to obesity on an individual basis, the cause of the shifts in these two factors on a societal scale is much debated. There are a number of theories as to the cause, but most believe it is a combination of various factors, and that happens to be true. I don't want to get too much into this. Smoking, malnutrition in early life is believed to play a role in the recently developing endocrine changes. The social class, past physiology, factors. I won't get too much into this. Ancient Greeks medicine recognized obesity as a medical disorder, and records that the ancient Egyptians saw it in the same way. Hippocrates wrote that the compulus is not only a disease itself, but the harbinger of others. The Indian surgeon Sharuta, 6th century BCE, related obesity to diabetes and heart disorders. He recommended physical work to help cure it, and then side effects. For the most of human mankind struggle with food scarcity. Obesity has thus historically been viewed as a sign of wealth and prosperity. only because it usually was among people of power. I'm going to have to add that, I'll explain later. It was common among high officials of Europe in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Of course, no one's going to criticize them because they would be in big trouble. As well as ancient East Asian civilizations in the 17th century. English medical author Tobias Venner is credited with being one of the first to refer to them as a societal disease and published in the English language book. With the onset of the Industrial Revolution, it was realized that the military and economic might of nations were dependent on both body size and strength of their soldiers and workers, increasing the average body mass index from what is now considered underweight to what is now the normal range played a significant role in development of industrialized societies. Height and weight thus both increased during the 19th century in the developed world. During the 20th century, the populations reached their genetic potential for height. Weight began increasing much more than height, resulting in obesity. In the 1950s, increasing with the wealth-developed world, decreased child mortality. By the body weight increased, heart and kidney disease became more common. During this period, insurance companies realized the connection between weight and life expectancy and increased premiums for the obese. Many cultures throughout history have viewed obesity as a result of character flaw. I know the obese or fat character in ancient Greek comedy was a glutton and a figure of mockery. During Christian times, the food was viewed as a gateway to the sin of sloth and lust. In modern Western culture, excess weight is often regarded as unattractive. And obesity is commonly associated with various negative stereotypes. People of all ages can face social stigmatization, and may be targeted by bullies, shunned by their peers. Public perception of Western I'm now talking about the sociological attitudes. I'm basically jumping into this part now. In the modern Western culture, excess weight is often regarded as unattractive, being associated with people of all ages can face social stigmatization and may be targeted by bullies or shunned by their peers. Public perceptions in Western society regarding healthy body weight differ from those regarding the weight that is considered ideal. And both have changed since the beginning of the 20th century. The weight that is viewed as the ideal had become lower since the 1920s. That is obviously the social pressures created the fascination with vanity. I will mention that later. This is illustrated by the fact that the average height of Miss America pageant winners increased by 2% from 1922 to 1999. While the average weight decreased by 12%. So you see the pressure there. Even if it's not healthy, they're forced to be as thin as possible. And as thinner is better, not more heavier. And that is a social determination, not a biological one. On the other hand, people's view concerning healthy weight have changed in the opposite direction. In Britain, the weight at which people consider themselves to be overweight is significantly higher in 2007 than in 1999. These changes are believed to be due to increasing rates of adiposity, leading to increased acceptance of extra body fat as being normal. Obesity is still seen as a sign of wealth and well-being in many parts of Africa. It has become particularly common since the HIV epidemic began. And that's it. I've already mentioned the sociological attitudes of obesity. That's all part of my subtopic. This all falls under my subtopic, sociological attitudes of obesity. And now I'm going to give my opinion. I'm going to read the rest, childhood obesity, all this nonsense. Most of that stuff is accurate. I will tell you this, that obesity is a physical condition that is caused by both genetic and environmental and epigenetic factors. The number one, the common explanation for it among people who have no understanding of obesity, and even some doctors who are supposed to who go to medical school and stuff like that, seem to think that obesity is caused by a increase of calorie intake and less expenditure. Basically, the person takes in too much consumption of calories, and doesn't expend that energy by not exercising or just, calories in, calories out. He takes in too many calories that he's able to expend. What they fail to realize that there's something in between that process is how people process energy. They've done experiments with people in England, and there was in Vermont where they gave they gave the incentive early parole. They told these prisoners, they gave them 1,000 calorie. They gave them an experiment on how much they can eat. And 1 week they gave them 1,000 calories. The next one 2,000 calories. The third week they gave them 3,000 calories. And the fourth week they told them to eat as much as possible. One man ate, and they were encouraged to eat as much as possible. By the fourth week, this one person ate as much as 10,000 calories. One person ate. He was approaching. The average diet of a grizzly bear is 20,000 calories. He was halfway approaching the diet of a grizzly bear. So it proves that that people's the ability to expend energy, how people process energy. What causes people to gain or lose weight is based on how people process energy. A lot of calories in, sometimes no calorie comes out, or some people can put in a lot of calories in and all the calories come out. So some people have a conservative digestive system and some people have an unrestricted, meaning it does not unrestricted digestive system, or very liberal digestive system, meaning that it doesn't store energy as easily as someone else with a digestive system that can store energy very easily. And there are certain diseases that can, metabolic disorders, like was mentioned in here in Wikipedia. There is an epigenetic factor. You take 2 unborn children during the first trimester. The baby unborn child A, for example, the woman eats a respectable diet filled with carbohydrates and fats and protein, and your body, or during these, you get 23 pairs of chromosomes for your father, 1 from the mother, and you get 46 chromosomes, and then you get, from that combination, you get the new 46 pairs of chromosomes. And during that process, proteins are being created, new proteins are being created, and it responds to in your environment, and this unborn child A, during the middle of during the first trimester, begins to get a sense of what the environment is like, and as by the end of the 9th month, it will develop a digestive system quite efficient, born without any susceptibility to obesity. Would be a normal child. Doesn't mean it can eat whatever it wants, but in some cases, some of them would be lucky and would be able to not have a problem with the susceptibility of the condition. And some people if a pregnant mother eats a lot, she might end up being fat, but the child will develop a genetic susceptibility to being able to consume just about any amount of energy. Those are the lucky. It's not a question of luck. It depends. You are at the mercy. The minute you become a zygote, until the moment you are 7 years old, even after you're born, you are programmed you are influenced by both genetic and environmental factors. So this child eventually will be born with no problem, will have no susceptibility or very little susceptibility to obesity. Now you take unborn child B, and this woman does not consume the right amount, consumes less than 1,000 calories. It's not a calorie is not a calorie. It's what contains. That's another myth, that a calorie is a calorie. No, a calorie is just a measurement of heat. It depends what those calories contain. An ice cream has 400 calories and is far less nutritious than 2,000 calories worth of vegetables, which has a lot more energy, a lot more nutritional efficiency. An ice cream that's only 400 calories can be nutritionally deficient. It's just sugars. But you take this lady, she eats nutritionally deficient foods, or sometimes doesn't eat at all, and then at some point during the first trimester, those genes, you inherit 23 pairs from the father and the mother, and it begins to respond to what is going on. It begins to sense that this is a world of scarcity, so it begins to turn on certain genes, And the next thing you know, you end up born a child that appears normal, maybe even underweight and premature in some cases, and will be susceptible to certain diseases. At that point, will become susceptible to that condition, and the minute he begins to eat any kind of a high carbohydrate, we might develop an extreme form of insulin resistance. Well, we all human beings have insulin resistance, but some people have less insulin resistance, or almost no insulin resistance, or at some point at so little, uh, so such a low degree of insulin resistance they can eat almost an innumerable amount of uh, nutrition of carbohydrates. But if you are born with a susceptibility to obesity, you might develop a very high insulin resistance. That means the minute you eat 10 grams of or 20 grams of sugar or carbohydrate, you will store it more easily than, you know. So epigenetics is a major factor. You are at the mercy of what your mother, and also no matter whatever stresses your mother goes through. A mother that is a mother that is stressed during pregnancy could also result in low cortisol levels. High cortisol levels. I'm sorry, and that could send a signal to genes to turn on. Nothing is genetic, and nothing is environmental. Biological development or biology is a combination of both genetics and environmental. You cannot talk about genetics outside of environment, and you cannot talk about environment outside of genetics. I know you cannot talk about environment outside of genetics, and you can't talk about genetics outside of environment. They both influence each other. Surely the stresses in our life, and exercise is another misconception. You can go on a treadmill for almost an hour and you can burn 300 calories and you burned one cookie. So exercise by itself, and I'm not encouraging people not to exercise. I think exercise is important because it helps you stay in shape, but it's not meant for weight loss. And the fitness industry has, exploited this, exploited this misconception. It's diet that's really important. You got to lower your carbohydrate if you have insulin resistance. As far as the ridicule or the social attitudes toward obesity, that is based on the preconception and the prejudice of the condition, and any opinions about it are based on that prejudice of the condition. So, other people say, well, calories in, calories out. They forget what's in between that process, how people process energy. But because of the prejudice of that condition and the overemphasis of vanity, because nobody cares about anybody's health. People say, well, they're a burden to the medical community. The